The night I saved a skyscraper, I was carrying a water pitcher, not a briefcase. If you've ever been the invisible one in the room, the person people talk around not to, you know what I mean. I wasn't supposed to say a word, and yeah, that happened anyway. I was 6 hours into a double at the Alloy, one of those Chicago spots where the silverware is heavier than your rent, and the host calls everyone ma'am, like it's policy. Table 19 had the air sucked out of it, a corner booth loaded with high-voltage money and quiet nerves. Gideon Vale sat there, the real estate guy, with half the skyline taped to his name, flanked by David Hanford, a lawyer who wore his confidence like cologne. Ethan Park, a CFO with spreadsheet posture, and 2 associates who looked like they were waiting for thunder. A site plan was spread across the white cloth like a battlefield, all crisp lines and tiny codes, and their voices had that low, dangerous tone you hear right before a verdict. I was supposed to glide, refill, disappear. Thing is, you can glide and still hear, and I used to be a law student before life called time out. I'd been a second year at Lakeshore Law, the weird kid who loved the parts of property law no one talks about at parties. Old easements, abandoned tunnels, those legal ghosts that keep living under new cities. Then my dad's HVAC business collapsed. Then his health did, and tuition turned into a cliff I couldn't jump. I kept my outlines in a box under my bed, like a person keeps photographs after a fire. A reminder of a life put on pause. Hanford leaned over the map and said, as a surgeon, closing is Friday. Grantham Ridge has half the deal, title search, clean variances, rubber stamped. We are past the point of no return. Vale didn't smile, he rarely does. His eyes moved the way a hawk's do, slow until they don't. Park asked about escrow, Hanford answered in numbers that made my stomach flinch, and I set bread down like it might explode. That's when I saw it. Not the bold utility runs, not the fiber lines or storm drains, something under all that faint, as a whisper, an elegant loop that didn't belong to modern, anything next to a tiny circle with tiny ripples inside. My hand paused mid-air, plate hovering, and for a second, I was back in Professor Lindstrom's lecture on the old Chicago freight tunnels, the ones dug under the loop to move coal and mail, the ones that left behind vent shafts marked on century-old survey linens. The city treats those shafts like holy ground. He'd said you don't build on them, you don't move them, you don't negotiate with them, you get a stop order and a fine that makes you dizzy. My heart hit so hard the butter plates ticked. No way, I thought, not at this table, not with this firm. Except the faint symbol lined up exactly with the spot labeled for Vale's primary caissons, and once you see a ghost, it refuses to turn back into a smudge. I did what a person does when rent is due, and the rule is, don't make waves. I walked away, delivered a martini to table 5, recited the halibut. Like I meant it, stacked plates, told myself to shut up. Jobs are oxygen. But a loose wire doesn't stop being a wire because you look away, and that's how houses burn. I stood at the server station with a pitcher in my hand, hearing the kitchen yell fire on 4, catching Vale's reflection in a wine bottle as he rubbed his temple like he was nursing a bruise, and I felt very small and a little furious. The associates nodded, Hanford smiled like a blade. Park did the math, and I picked up the pitcher the way a person picks up armor. "Excuse me, Mr. Vale," I said, aiming for steady and landing somewhere near it. 4 heads turned, the room dropped 5 degrees. Hanford smiled that sharp smile. "We're fine on water," he said, which was code for go away. I looked at Vale. "I won't take your time. I used to study property law. I think there's an old freight tunnel vent marked under the southeast corner of your foundation. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. If I'm right, your crew is going to hit a do-not-touch zone on day 1. Hanford laughed like I'd told a cute joke. We commissioned the most exhaustive survey on record. There is no tunnel, no access, and no legal impediment on my client's entree. He looked at my shoes. We're in the middle of something important. David Vale said not loud, just a pressure drop. Hanford closed his mouth. Vale's eyes stayed on mine. Where? I pointed, handshaking. Here. The circle with ripples. They used to mark vent shafts like that. He didn't look at Hanford or the associates. He didn't stall. Ethan, get Commissioner Romero on the line, he said. It's 9:30, Park whispered. She'll answer, Vale said. Tell her it's regarding a protected CFN easement. The phone hit the table speaker on silent except for typing, and the way everyone tried not to breathe. 2 minutes were a lifetime. Mr. Vale Romero said crisp, like coffee, I've got it. CFN 14B vent access established 1909, protected under the Subterranean Safety Act of 1911, reaffirmed in 1978. No building over, no obstruction, no variance. Penalties include stop work removal at owner cost and fines. Vale closed his eyes for 1 second, then thanked her and hung up, and the click sounded like a gavel in a church. He tapped the map with one finger exactly where my finger had hovered. That, he said to Hanford, is a live bomb. Park swallowed. Hanford's voice was suddenly very small. 100 million forfeited, escrow 75 in non-performance, 175 gone by lunch. Then Hanford turned on me like it was my fault the city remembered its own history. You know what you've done, he hissed, banker polish gone. You blew up a project that would have put thousands to work just to play lawyer between salads. I didn't have a script for that kind of anger. Vale did. He spoke without moving anything but his mouth. You told me clean. You said exhaustive. A waitress saved my company from your due diligence. He looked at me. Your name? Mara, I said, Mara Ellis. Sit, he said, pointing at the end seat. Dinner is over. David, your team is in my office at 8. Ethan, we start at 7, Mara 9. Don't be late. I didn't sleep much. I sat on my apartment floor with my shoes still on, staring at the business card his hand had pressed into mine. The next morning I wore the only blazer I own and rode the elevator so high my ears popped. His assistant greeted me by name, which felt like stepping through a door I wasn't allowed to touch before. The plan from the restaurant lay marked in red like a battle diagram. Hanford and his people filed out looking like they'd stared too long at their reflections. Vale paced in front of a wall of glass, and Lake Michigan looked like a blue sheet ironed flat. You didn't just spot a mark, he said, you gave me leverage. He'd called Damon Keats at Grantham at dawn. Keats bluffed, then ranted about contracts and clocks, then went quiet when Vale said CFN 14B and fraudulent inducement. Vale didn't run to court, not yet. He flipped the table, told Keats the deal survives if the price jumps off a cliff and the redesign bill isn't ours. Down from $980 to $720 plus $40 to $50 for rerouting the loading core, a swing that still makes me blink. He agreed, I asked. Vale's smile wasn't warm. He agreed. He cares more about avoiding discovery than about a few $100 million. He'll call it value engineering. He stopped and looked at me like he was deciding whether to bet the farm. I'm not giving you a check, he said. That would be an insult. I'm paying for you to finish law school, all of it, and when you graduate you'll have an office next to mine. Your job will be to find the ghosts, the ones no one else sees. I nodded because words didn't have traction. I cried later quietly in the elevator, and if you've ever had a good thing happen after a long stretch of bad, you know that feeling, like oxygen finally getting into the corners of your lungs. Back in school, law wasn't a test anymore. It was a language for decoding where power hides. For a seminar, I picked the lakefront Crown deal and dove into public filings. That's where the twist lives. 6 months before the agreement, Grantham quietly bought a dying archival company called Prairie Cartography. 2 weeks later, a junior staffer there, Kevin Morrow, resigned, and a week after that, he popped up as a contract paralegal at Hanford, and Reed assigned to Vale's file. My stomach went cold. I built a timeline, found a $200,000 consulting onboarding payment routed through a shell, wrote a memo titled, "The Ghost Had Help," and sent it to Vale at 1:13 a.m. He replied in minutes. Tomorrow. 9. When I sat down, he had the printout, his jaw set. Our security firm traced the wire, he said. It lands in Morrow's account days after he joins Hanford's team. After I fired Hanford, he vanished. Keats didn't just set a trap, he hired a guide to lead us into it. He stared out at the river voice going colder conspiracy sabotage state's attorney or industry exile. Maybe both. I told him what I believed in my bones, protect this project and protect the next poor team without a me at their table, and he nodded once, decision done. People like to imagine trumpets after this part, headlines, public apologies, villains in handcuffs. Here's what actually happened. Vale put out a bland statement about routine final review and mutually agreed adjustments. Hanford slid into a senior advisory role, and his firm still sponsors the opera. Keats posted yacht photos and got fire emojis. Morrow is a rumor. We got the tower. Thousands worked who would have been laid off if the site went dark. Justice doesn't arrive with confetti. It arrives like concrete, curing, slow, quiet, permanent. I walk past the alloy some nights and catch a whiff of seared scallops and lemon polish, and think about the girl at table 5 trying not to drop a plate that might cost her a shift, and I remember why invisible people see things. We live close to the ground where the real story leaks through. If there's any gift in being overlooked, it's that you learn to look harder to notice the circle with ripples that doesn't belong to say it out loud, even when your voice shakes. That's my story. A symbol the size of a quarter shifted a deal by $250 million. A woman in worn-out shoes walked into a conversation she was meant to orbit. A man with a spine like rebar used the truth like a lever instead of a headline. Was I brave or just tired of being quiet? Depends on the day. Should I have stayed in my lane, or did I owe it to the crews who would have eaten the fallout that's on you? Tell me in the comments what you think is right here, where the line is between doing your job and speaking up, whether power always protects itself or whether the truth still swings a hammer when it has to. If this hit something real for you, tap like, share it with someone who needs a nudge to say the thing they see, and drop your own story about the tiny detail you caught that changed everything. I want to hear about the ghosts you've seen.